on to domestic and sexual violence. Have you ever been a victim to domestic violence or sexual violence, or do you know anyone that has been a victim to it? And how did you deal with that, or how did you support that person dealing with that, if you did support that person? Quite a lengthy question, but yeah.
Well,
I'm looking this way because I've just been going this way.
So obviously I can't speak to domestic abuse, but I can speak to sexual abuse. So obviously I've said previously that I went through one incident of sexual assault or sexual abuse by my primary school bully. So that's my experience. And what was the second part of your question? How did I deal with it?
How did you deal with that?
Well, I didn't, obviously, as we said. It took me 18 years to disclose it. It's taken me 2 rounds of EMDR to heal from it. I think with men who've been domestic... EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy. Remember I spoke about the hypnotherapy stuff? When you talk to different versions of yourself inside your own head?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that.
You learn a lot.
I'm sure there's people as well that are going to be like, what is he talking about?
So and I can only speak for myself. I think from the men that I've spoken to on my podcast who've been sexually abused, especially heterosexual men who have been sexually abused by other men, it affects loads of things massively. So it makes you question your sexuality from a first stance, and that's a whole load of shame. Some therapists have called it homosexual OCD. Some therapists have called it internalized homophobia. I normally tend to go with the latter. And that can be very debilitating because of the shame cycle. And I think when I went through that, I found it very jarring because I'd always had gay friends. I was never homophobic. So it was kind of this, well, why am I feeling this when I'm a good person? So that was very hard to deal with. And then you have other things. So, I was a child when it happened. I was 8 years old and my body reacted to it. So it was called involuntary arousal. Yeah. Wow. I don't remember it happening, but I remember that my body felt the feeling of it. Yeah. So what happens when you have that feeling is that, again, makes you question your sexuality because you think you've been stimulated by it instead of your body reacting to it. So you have to separate that distinction because otherwise, again, the shame will just build and build and build. Yeah. So there's loads of different things that it's affected as well. It can affect your ability with masturbation. It can affect your ability to watch pornography. I find most pornography, especially explicit pornography, pretty triggering. Yeah. So I tend to avoid that. For a lot of people, that might be a positive. Yeah. So my mind is not as corrupted. Yeah. But again, that's an issue I had to deal with, and I always found it a bit weird when, boys, you're 15, 16, someone will try and show you in school, and immediately your brain goes, oh, why do I want to watch that? And then that makes you think, why do I want to see heterosexual porn? So it's very, very complex, very, very complex.
Wow, yeah, honestly.
Yeah, so going back to the definition of sexual violence, it's when you are forced to do a sexual act or coerced. And actually, when I was just thinking about that, I was thinking, again, this is the processing. Have I ever been forced? But yes, actually, by definition. So when you're a child, when the complexity with trauma is that because you're in the place, you think you are consenting or you are part engaged.
And you blame yourself. Why don't I fight back?
Messes your mind. Until later, when you understand the definition, you realise that actually I was raped or sexual violence and stuff like that. So I would say yes, by definition, because of what the definition of sexual violence is. Mine looked like coercion. Mine looked like lack of consent. Very complex, not just on one occasion, from 10 onwards to later. So it was multiple instances. But because I was in the places where I thought I was engaged in a relationship with an adult or thing, I assumed that I'm part of in a relationship.
You assume you're consenting.
Exactly. Until later. When you understand, you've got information, you go to child exploitation training. I actually identified that I was a victim in my professional role as doing CSC training. And that rocked my world because I literally had to leave the room. I had a breakdown. The trainer had to come in because I then looked at the board and I was like, tick, 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 that was me. And that was literally the revelation. So in terms of sexual violence and DV, I will come from the perspective with DV as a child witnessing. So on both,
And
how
that's
did
also
I?
a victim.
So
now.
guys, when they say DV,
Domestic
means
violence.
violence.
So we're
Because
Good.
some
No, it's
people
really
are like,
good.
DV
And
sounds like a
we are
digital
naughty
video recorder or something.
Yeah, as a professional, I use a lot of abbreviations, but you need to say so.
Yeah.
Domestic violence. As from domestic violence, I was a victim because I witnessed with my parents. Okay, so how do you deal with it? I didn't.
Wow.
I didn't deal with it. So the complexity was, I said, if an incident would happen, I can literally the incident happened, I go home, switch on TV, eat food, go to bed.
Disassociate.
Literally,
Yeah.
and I
Disassociate.
realised, again, the wording that I disassociated a lot.
You didn't know this.
And my coping was my imaginational porn.
Wow.
So, and then that's complex because the shame. So I would go for 3 hours in my mind, imagining that I was a princess and I was floating, and I realised that was not, but in therapy I realised it was disassociation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I can be there for hours,
Wow.
like hours in that
It's your mind
imagination
protecting
state,
you.
literally.
It's your mind
and that was
protecting
my
you.
coping mechanism. So the disassociation was my coping mechanism, and actually I did not know.
Mm.
I only later found out. So I coped by suppressing, I coped by overeating, I coped by watching lots of TV, sleeping. I would sleep. People used to laugh at me, like family members, because they would know me I could sleep in the afternoon for hours, and then I'll go to bed and sleep. But that was my coping mechanism.
I think as well, coming back to what Kelechi said on sexual abuse, is that when you're an adult, you think about the abuse with an adult mind. So it increases more shame because the things that that happened to you as a child, you think about as an adult.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're a child, like Kelechi said,
Yeah.
she thought she was consenting. So you
Yeah.
almost think like you're older than you are,
Absolutely.
which is why you can be vulnerable to the abuse because
Yeah.
an adult will take advantage of that.
Absolutely.
100%.
Wow. For me, because I get a lot of people. Sorry, I was just saying as a minister, I get a lot of people that do go through things, and they'll come and open up to me and what they're going through. When we're dealing with domestic violence, it's one of the hardest cases to deal with. Is because, first of all, you're an outsider, and you can't just come in and start giving direction. So it's really difficult. The last case I had was a lady. She had a big fight with her husband, and then the police came. The husband ended up jumping out the window, and then he got arrested. Then the case went to court, and after he got to court, everything was. They wanted to obviously take the man to jail, and the lady didn't want him to go to jail. So now she's asking me for prayers that her husband doesn't go to jail.
Ooh.
So it's very complex. So what my question is that what happens between when he was abused for you to pull him away?
So I think I think with that case,
Yeah.
she could have done that because the whole structure and network was around him. And what happens with abusers is that they can cut the victim off from friends, they can control their finances, if there's children involved. Yeah, so this is obviously me just speculating, but what I imagine she must have thought is, if he goes to jail, what's going to happen with money? What's going to happen with childcare?
Yeah.
And all of those things could end up outweighing the relief that she'll have from not being domestically abused.
And the way she put out, right?
Yeah.
She said, "Oh, I was just lying."
Yeah.
Normal. That's
It's very
yeah.
common. I mean, I'm a survivor of domestic abuse, and I was in that relationship for years. And there were instances where I got to a stage where I would walk away, and I would then go back, or I would welcome him back, and there were various different factors that contributed it. One that I didn't really at the beginning understand that it was domestic abuse, and I didn't have a support network. So I hear what you're saying in terms of being isolated. Some women are isolated and being cut off, but I didn't have a financial barrier. So for me, it wasn't even about the fact that I needed financial support or anything. It was the fact that I wanted to believe he could change.
Wow.
And the way that, my perpetrator would, deal with this situation is he would always be very sorry. He would always make me feel like it was my fault. And so I would always be in a position where I'd be like, oh, okay, well, maybe if I hadn't have said it this way, or I hadn't have perhaps, come out at a certain time.
Yeah, that gaslighting, correct.
Yeah. So for me, it was more about me trying to understand actually.
You wanted to forgive him as well, I imagine. Yeah.
Exactly, and I wanted, and also we were raising a child together.
Yeah.
So for me, it was very hard to walk away, but I did eventually.
Good.
And after years of emotional and physical abuse.
Wow.
And I think if anyone that is in that type of situation should know that actually it's okay if you haven't walked away. That's the advice that I would give, because I know that place, I know that space. And you never want that person to feel judged.
Yes. Why don't you leave? And that's such a horrible thing to hear as well.
There were instances where it was becoming obvious to others in my life, and people were trying to tell me that I needed, but because obviously they lacked the understanding of how to support somebody in that situation. It was quite hard for me to hear it, so then I pushed people away. So if you have got somebody coming to you, asking you for prayers, support them, pray for them, but also give them education about how they can empower themselves as an individual, so they can stand independently and know that they're an individual person. Because for me, I felt like I wasn't an individual person. So although I am quite successful, in the work that I do, I'm educated at a degree level, all of those things, I still didn't feel like I was enough to be on my own. But then if you consider people who aren't like me, who perhaps have other barriers such as no recourse and financial barriers, and the immigration barriers, it's probably even harder for someone to walk away. So I always encourage people to always listen actively if they're coming to you. If they are going back, then support them, but make sure that they know that you're always there and that you're not going to judge them, because you don't know next time they might not come to you. And you want them to always feel like they can.
Yeah, and I think the really important thing which has changed in the conversation is that where previously perhaps people were saying, why don't he or she leave? Now it needs to be, why doesn't the other person stop?
So there's
No, because I work within the field, so it's like it's very often like if something happens, the victim and the children most likely they have to leave the house. Why do they need to leave the house? They leave the schools, they leave everything, and then they have to go to refuge if they even want to go to refuge. And then in the refuge, the children, it affects the children, of course. And it's like, why do they have to go and they haven't actually done anything? And that's generally a conversation that's happening within our office at the moment, because so often these days, a lot of people. I work with children and young people, so the younger they are, like especially like the teenagers that are like 17, 18, they're like, I'm not leaving. Like, they need to go. So they want
stability.
And do you get what I mean? And it's a serious thing. Why do you have to go? In reality, they should go. Like even when they try and get occupation orders, it's so hard for them to actually get that perpetrator out of the house, when really they shouldn't have to uplift everything and go. So that's why I was like, you tell them.
So on the back of what Annie was saying, thank you for sharing, because that's really powerful. I also work professionally, so I've worked as a health assistant where I've supported families who've actually been victims of domestic violence, but then also I've been on, I would say MARAC, but it's multi-agency risk assessment conferences as a lead, right? So I've sat on the panel as a health representative. So within these forums, these are dealing with the most extreme DV, domestic violence cases, okay? And I will just give a bit of statistics. 1 in 10, I don't know, you can correct me if it's currently women die, or as a result of domestic violence. men are also victims of domestic violence.
Yes.
But just in terms of the statistics and research, women are more likely to be victims.
Yeah.
So when I'm delivering training, domestic violence training, I would always say that it's more risky for a woman to leave the home.
100%.
And you must never encourage, never impose or never victimize a woman for not leaving. As Annie said, because the risk is higher.
Yeah.
There is a cultural dimension now.
Yeah.
So I do cultural competency training. Because when it's domestic violence and culture, it's another realm. So if you think about, I always ask the country, because the country will determine how the view of this
The
whole
risk
subject
The
to
woman has to
increase.
leave.
Exactly.
They'll kick her out.
So
Yeah.
culturally, when I heard that,
Yeah.
I would think, where's the woman from?
Yeah.
Because inadvertently, when she is now changing it, she may go to, again, ignorance of family members, stay in the home.
Yeah.
Why are you going?
Mm.
Just manage it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah. Be humble.
And that's when,
Yeah.
so if I'm speaking to supervising professionals, if they tell me that the woman is from a certain country,
Then you have to understand the culture.
you have to. I would even say risk is higher in some cases if the woman is changing her story. If
Yeah.
then she changes her story, and I know they're from a certain, I would say to them, this is a grade, this is like red
Yeah.
alert. If you hear the threats of kills or there's text messages, this is red. And it's really key to think about from a cultural lens, because some might say if she changes the story, okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
But if you look at the country of origin, what she's changed and what she's saying, I would then say actually this is high risk. What I find now is professionals are not thinking from a lens of being informed,
Oh, 100%.
and that's the issue. So you've got people that lack insight into domestic violence or sexual violence, who are almost
Like
providing the
tick
wrong.
boxing. Is
Yes.
this wrong?
Just
Yeah.
another
No.
case.
So they
Yeah.
just tick box.
Yeah.
They don't look at the individual case, and they don't assess risk. So if I see certain red flags which might be different in another case, I always have to think about the case by an individual lens. Okay,
Mm.
always have to assess based on her perspective. What does this look like for her? Because what she might be going through might be similar to someone else, but it's a completely different situation. So I always think about is if they ask them for support, they change the subject, the story. You may not demonise them, or why are you now changing it? It will just think, what do you need?
Yeah.
I would ask the person, what do you need from me? I would say, I would like to do this for you. Do you want me to privately email IGVA, an independent domestic violence advocate? Do you want me to refer you here? Do you want me to speak to this person? But I always ask you to ask the person, what do they need in this instance? Think about risk, think about if there's children in the home, because all these things matter. If there's a child in the home, my advice might be a bit different, especially if you're saying to me that sexual violence is a part of it, and actually, so I may then have to, so this is safeguarding, right?
Yeah.
You have to breach
You have
certain
to,
things,
yeah.
So if someone discloses to you, if the child's involved, then I would say to you, I'm really this, but in this instance, I have to, my duty is, and then there will be a referral. That's how I manage it.
Yeah.
I think what Kelechi's saying is really powerful, because it shows not just it shows that there's a massively long way to go in regards to domestic abuse education for for female victims. For male victims, I mean, that's a completely different story. It's
Never spoken.
never spoken. I mean, there's 4 lads in this room right now, including me. How many men do we know who would speak about being domestically
Can I
abused?
just add same-sex domestic abuse?
Yes.
Without increasing,
Yeah.
so men or men. And
Yeah.
it's fine. Yeah.
So the Office of National Statistics shows that 1 in 3 domestic abuse victims are men.
Yeah.
Now, what I would like more research into is underreporting, because I can count on more than 2 hands the amount of men who have come to me and said they've been domestically abused, but they would never ever report it. So how many of them are being missed out from the statistics?
Yeah.
There are currently, I think, as of 2011, there's 4,000 women's shelters for domestic abuse in this country. Brilliant. There's 16 for men.
Yeah.
There's no male domestic violence shelters in London, and the first one in the UK was for men was only set up in 2003. So, with regards to where men can go, we've still got a long way to go.
Just to add to that, because I don't want to forget this, because we're on that topic, in regards to men, I sit on Marek as well every other Friday, and I notice, because obviously I'm from IDFA service, and obviously we get all the referrals, very often if we hear a man, most of the time we don't even get the referral for them, because they don't want safeguarding support, so it's not going to get to us, and it happens so often, so they'll be like, Jackie, have you got this person? No, we don't have them in service, because they don't even want that support, probably because they don't want to talk about it or take it further. The police just came to the house because it's been called in, and that's the reason it's being heard at Marek, because it's so high risk. So
it comes back to what Kelechi was saying is when we had the conversation about, you know, are men being listened to? And there was a news article that came out on BBC that was done with men who are survivors. And they spoke to a charity called the Men's Advisory Project. And in that, they spoke to men who had been victims of domestic abuse, and they said, our perpetrators made false claims of domestic abuse against us or sexual abuse claims against us in order to control us or in order to get custody of children. And when that happened, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but there was backlash from certain feminist commentators who were saying, they were dismissing it. And I think if you do that, we get into very dangerous territory where they'll never speak about it again. Just because they are giving you their story does not invalidate it. Both things can be true. Both, you know, women can be domestically abused by men, and men can be domestically abused by women. Just because one is talking about the other doesn't mean that invalidates it. And that's what I think. If one sex loses here, we all lose.
And I wanted to jump on the back of what Fred said. I mentioned about same-sex DV. So when I'm sitting on Mareks in different boroughs, I'm seeing when there is a perpetrator and it's a victim and it's a man, there's a complexity where the relationship is with a male. Sometimes in some of the case studies, they are undercover. I don't want to use they are men that are not
living stealth. Living stealth.
What's the proper term for it? So there is complexity. Sometimes I found professionals don't want to touch it, or they don't want to go there. So then support is almost like we can't get support because there's a stigmatization within this relationship.
If they come from a religion or a background where there's homophobia is more rife as well.
Has even been brought up by a police call out. It's not actually that they've disclosed it themselves. So the violence is such that there's been police altercation or a police call out. So then the case has been brought because of the police call out. And then it's the complexities about the stigma. And then it's professional ignorance.
Yes.
Because of the
how do they handle it? Yeah. If you're not out, how do you talk about it? How do you get support? Your mum might not know, your dad might not know.
We don't want support, or we can't support, or we don't know how to support. And what the support looks like for a female may be very different. For a man, they might not want it either.
Yeah.
They might not need. They might not say I don't want counselling because I haven't even gone to the perspective that I've accepted the relationship that I'm in.
Yes.
Not even come to the point that there's violence in this relationship. Complex.
I think it's a different story for same-sex women as well. I think with regards to domestic abuse, I read a book by a psychotherapist called Jason Hanson who wrote about domestic abuse, and in that he talked about a Gallup poll which surveyed women, and 82% of the lesbian women who responded to it said they'd been victims of domestic abuse.
Wow.
82%.
That's very high.
That is a mass. I was shocked when I read that figure. Because I was more shocked because why isn't anyone speaking about it? In the mainstream.
Speaking about it. I mean,
in the mainstream, sorry, I should say.
But I suppose it's more about who's interested to hear about it here. It's like going back to what we were saying around men and the issues around, intimate partner relationships of men. And I think unless more people talk about these issues and they're interested to share these issues and disseminate it within the community, I think we're going to continue to.
It will still be taboo. It will still be underground.
It's still going to be a problem. So that's why I think it's really good that we're seeing campaigns like the Mayor of London's Have a Word campaign. I actually was part of the group that consulted on that, and seeing how we can be men can actively be part of changing certain types of cultures around misogyny and calling this type of behaviour out, because I think that's another issue in that we see and observe some of this harmful behaviour, but we don't say anything about it, we just watch it, and it becomes normal, normalised. And then also going back to what you were saying around violence resistance and that
victim blaming.
I think that's another kind of barrier which I think within our society that we need to try and tackle, because that also stops people being able to talk about these issues, and further education being widely disseminated in all types of communities, especially communities where it's hard for you to understand and comprehend stuff that isn't part of your DNA, like disability. Yesterday I heard some really powerful testimonies at the Victim Summit, and of a lady who is disabled, and how the police didn't take her seriously about her assault, and how it was linked to her disability and things. So I think there are so many things, around our society where we need to listen more, and we need to let people know that actually we believe them.
I think that links just going to say that links in when you spoke about empathy, like this society lacks it so much.
I was going to ask all of you three a question, because I want to always increase my education on domestic abuse and domestic violence, and you were saying about how the word it was targeted at men and how other men can challenge it. So from a female perspective, I spoke to women about my mental health first, and that might be a biological thing, it might be because I found they would be more trustful, who knows. However, from your perspective, I wanted to get your answer on it. If you knew that a woman in your life was domestically abusing a friend, how would you deal with it? What would be the tools that you'd put in place? Who's a male? Sorry, who's a
I tell my friends.
Yeah.
I tell my friends, because for me, I can't stand by and hear them say something that is really not right, and I say to why did I ask them questions like why did you think that was appropriate to speak to that woman in that way, or to be sexist, like I've got male friends that are like that. I'm not there to judge anyone, but I can't be in a space and not say anything, because I know what I've been through. From a young age I was also sexually assaulted by a group of older people, so I get how you can just innocently say things that might not necessarily you understand what you're saying, and I think the more we can talk about those things openly, and we can make change around it. So I don't mind. I've moved forward in my life to a position where actually it's okay for me to call that a behaviour, woman or man.
I think my question is more, if your friend is the man and he's the victim, how do you support him when the perpetrator is female? As a female, like I know if I can challenge my male, if I can challenge my male friend to support the man.
Oh, that's a very good question. I think it's quite difficult, and I'm just basing it on the fact that I've worked with, especially not necessarily my age group, but when I'm talking about the children and young people that I support, it's actually harder for the boys to open up than the girls in general. However, when we do find that point of trust, which takes some weeks, sometimes months, then they start opening up. So I think if that was my friend, I would hope, most of my friends, we do have that safe space that they talk about pretty much everything. So if that was to happen to them, I hope that they'll feel that they can trust me enough to tell me about if something has happened. And obviously, because they know the field that I work in regardless, I feel like they would. Hopefully, if you guys are watching this. But I would be able to help them with the tools that could help them. I would be able to, because I wouldn't necessarily, because you see how there's like the men.
You're in the field though, Jackie. So what would a female friend be able to do for her male friend who's being domestically abused by a female? That's the question I want to try and answer, because then I can help my female friends and be like, if your male friend trusts you more and talks to you about your mental health more, then I can give you the tools.
Communication is the first thing. Give them that safe space, 100%, because for them to speak to you, that was a big step in general. Definitely try and find out what support they want help with, if they even want support, actually, because sometimes people just want to talk about it, talk to you about it, and that's it. If they want further support, I would say look at the local services that could possibly help them, and I would say be there every step of the way as well, because I think sometimes when they open up to you, you're that person that's kind of unfortunately carrying them as well, and like holding their hand because they trusted you with it. If you kind of like start making them feel like, okay, you're on your own now, they might kind of hold back. Everyone's different. Some people, like, they might feel empowered and be like, yeah, I'm going to do this by myself, this, that. But some people need you to hold their hand and just kind of guide you. Like, let's go to this support session. Let's go and meet this person. Or let's go and report. Because that's a big thing as well. I'm going to report if he wants to. And
so going further down the line then, what if they're in an area and they look up and say, there's no men's domestic violence shelter here? Or the police won't believe me, or like what when that barrier happens, what do we do then?
I mean, in terms of there being places that you can go, you know, there are places that you can call that can support men. So there's Respect, and this is Survivors UK, and they will know locally, you know, where people can go and get that kind of support. And there are also grassroots organisations, you know, that are on the ground doing great work and just creating safe spaces for men. And I think as long as you've got that awareness and that understanding that those spaces exist, then I think you can be really impactful and helpful to that person. In regards to reporting to the police, that has to be their decision. You know, men or women, you know. And they should understand that actually it doesn't minimise what they're going through if they haven't, because I think that's another thing which acts as a barrier for people coming forward to say that they've experienced some kind of abuse. You know, they think, well, actually it can't be abuse if I haven't reported it. That's
Right,
So I think just making that explicitly clear is that actually
it doesn't need this step. To mean
that you've actually experienced this harmful situation in your life, and just be their friends, just be supportive to then know that, you know, what they're going through is real. Because that's another thing that really helps, you know, people to move away from those type of situations, is understanding that it's real, and somebody believes me.
You know, being believed.
Knowing that actually your feelings are valid. They are very valid.
Validate them.
And knowing that, you know, somebody's hearing me and wants to hear me, because sometimes people don't want to hear. You know, so I think just reassuring them, hearing, listening, and encouraging them that, you know, it's okay for them to come and talk to you anytime, and that if you don't know the answers, I'll search with you.
Better than saying that than saying, oh, I know I can get this all done for you. I
think we're not always going to know everything. I think just being honest.
The power of knowing what you don't know.
Exactly. So I think that's how I tend to deal with those types of issues. Just treat everyone as an individual.
I think there's not enough awareness about male abuse. We just had, especially in America, we had a case with a famous actor. What's his name again?
What, Johnny Depp?
Yeah. That was actually interesting to see. And I think
Yeah.
Jackie was really interested in it.
Yeah, because it's hard, you know. You don't know. I'm not going to sit here and say, I don't know who's telling the truth. But it's hard in that situation, because we can't sit here in the outside. Only them two know the truth. That's how I feel. And I'm not saying he's lying, I'm not saying she's lying, but they know the truth. And that's why I was interested, because the whole world was watching
but the question is, do you think he was abused or not? See, that's what I
see, there we go.
Nobody believes them.
No, but that's the thing.
Both their behaviour was
harmful. That's why it was hard for me to make
so the case, if you're going into it, it was defamation. So that's
that was the reason. That was the reason for the.
So if you want to then talk about abuse and stuff,
but the abuse, they didn't talk about the abuse.
But if you want to talk what the case was about, it was about
defamation,
and actually, it's this person's telling this truth about, you know, and it was related to something she had said in it. But I just wanted to add on actually on that basis of that, because it goes back to the question Fred asked. There is in the media, there is a lot of focus on physical DV.
Yes.
100%.
Which is visible.
For men, so if you're thinking about that,
Coercive
and
control is
yeah,
not visible.
not
Yeah.
not spoken
Yeah.
about, and then also what the police and people might react to, maybe the
More
physical
one, but not
But I
And
would
that's because they can
suggest,
show it in social media.
and the reaction is, oh, physical abuse. So a man it's complex. So a man might not want to. So even the admittance of being physically abused by a woman is a whole.
Is emasculating for them. Yeah, of course.
So you might not even get to that. But if I know that a friend is of it, what I do see a lot of is manipulation, emotional harm from women to men.
Yeah.
So there's a process in terms of people not speaking about that aspect of DV.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I see that
And I think
it's
that's a big
so
one.
complex and it's so big because there's trauma and there's issues. But what I have seen is a lot in terms of the women emotionally abusing their partners, but what that might look like is, I can note that from very early relationships, that you can see red flags, and actually you can see how things can eventually get to a physical aspect.
Yeah.
What people don't speak about is the emotional abuse, which is the downgrading, the calling names, the
Questioning sexual ability, question
So
this.
many-
Yeah.
I think that
things.
brings it back to people not acknowledging that it is abuse.
and they don't know about it, and ignorance
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
So going back to in terms of the Johnny Depp case, it's a very complex one. But what people were so interested, what I was seeing as a professional, and from the things that we're discussing, that there was an emotional, a heavy amount of emotion. That wasn't the subject of why they were coming to court, but I
It
think
really
what
wasn't, but I feel like the social media made that the subject.
they
You know what I
made
mean?
it because of what was being portrayed
Yeah.
by the evidence and things, and you've seen a man who was portrayed as quite in his character. I think the world came to
His alcohol addiction was used against him, wasn't it?
but it was
Yeah.
used against him. But if you saw his character, it was almost like he was quite submissive.
Yes, in court.
Did
Yeah,
he
he was.
come
Yeah,
across like
yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah.
So it came across the way, and then it came across like this other person who was demonized was quite the opposite to what she was portraying. And I think the media, the world fell in love with the case in a sense because it was almost like focusing on male abuse, what that potentially looks like, but also he appears to be quite submissive and but then you've got someone that people were saying, I'm not, what's the word, legal
Yeah, allegedly, yeah.
Allegedly, thank you so
That
much.
won't
Allegedly.
Don't have money.
Manipulative and emotionally abusive. So there's an aspect of domestic violence. It's not talked
Yeah,
about.
I think there was also in that case, there was pieces of evidence that came out from both sides that were kind of dismissed by both sides. So, there was the piece of evidence where she had allegedly, defecated in his bed. And then she said it was the dog, and all sorts of stuff. And then there was the piece of evidence that she had allegedly cut his finger off, and so there was bits that I think kind of were projected highly on one side and dismissed completely on the other.
Yeah.
So what ends up is no one learned anything, and I think what I saw is that a lot of male victims of domestic abuse took from that is. We're not going to. If Johnny Depp can't be believed, this is what they're saying. Then I can't. Then I won't be believed.
So that's when the case went in that favour.
Yeah.
It was like this is a what was
Watershed.
it for men. Like so, it's kind of like okay, this is amazing for men.
Yes.
People can believe us. That this
But then
is,
that's what I feel like social media was definitely steering it though, because they started realizing the attention it was getting in what area. Because like you said, initially it was just about defamation of character.
Yeah,
But it became a whole different thing. Do you get what I'm saying? And yes, all those things are linked in, but once again, we spoke about how social media has so much influence.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Did that.
On that note, there's another case.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Was it the one recently?
Yeah, it's recently.
The woman who's worked for the probation service.
Oh, police.
Yeah.
Exactly, that one.
And
And
what's
there's
that? Sorry, the probation. Yeah.
Yeah, she worked for His Majesty's Prison Service,
Yeah.
and she domestically abused her husband for 20 years, and the judge said it was the worst domestic abuse case he'd ever seen. She forced him to pick up her own excrement. She did it on the floor, and then she forced him to pick it up. And then she also hit him so hard with a wine bottle repeatedly that it permanently disfigured his ear. So serious abuse. And there was other stuff in the article that I read, and he actually did I was reading this before we did this, and he did an interview in the Daily Mail, like talking about it, and I was like,
Actually, I'm going to Google that.
I'm
actually.
Yeah, you need to go back.
Yeah, and he recorded, so that's how he was able to, you know,
You
prove
was recording,
evidence.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a
So,
good one.
so
This
some of the
recording
verbal,
thing
It's a real thing.
It's a real
It helps.
thing.
That's good advice.
It helps.
Yeah,
It's a
some of
real
the verbal
thing.
abuse.
Yeah.
Make sure you record it.
Yeah, I advise
Yeah.
my clients to keep log of things as well
Yeah.
when they're still
Yeah.
if they're still in the same house or in a
Yes.
relationship
Yeah.
and they're planning to leave
Yeah.
because it helps.
Yeah, there was another case. Only fan model killed her boyfriend. It was a night
America.
in Florida. I don't know.
I think I saw that
You
one.
saw that one, yeah.
Yeah, I saw an Instagram.
They're going back to
video, yeah.
court
Mm.
on the 3rd of April.
Look at you following stuff. I'm with you.
Yeah, you're welcome. See?
I'm glad these things are getting reported
That's
though.
right,
I'm
yeah.
really glad
Yeah.
they're getting reported now.
Yeah.
100%.
It
Quickly,
definitely
just